It isn't that we have to run away from this world. Jesus came into this world to show us that as Christians we don't escape the world, we live within the world. Jesus came into the world to show us that in this world it is still possible to take the opportunities of quiet, peaceful, desert time so that we can hear God speak to us. So we can hear God speak to us. How many times do parents tell their children to do something, and then 15 minutes later you have to tell them again, and then 10 minutes later you have to tell them again? Why? They heard you, they just weren't listening. Because while you were speaking to them, the TV's on, someone else is talking to them, they're thinking about what they want to do later on in the day. They're not giving your voice desert time. And sometimes in our lives we fail to give God the desert time that he needs, the time to speak to us, to guide us, to correct us, to put us on that right course. That's why the scriptures tell us that John was a voice where? In the desert. John was a voice in the desert, crying out, prepare the way for the Lord. Now, if he's in the desert saying that, the people who are in the city aren't hearing it. The people in the towns aren't hearing it. The people on the farms aren't hearing it. John was a voice in the desert because that's when God has that opportunity to speak to us, to speak to our hearts, to guide us in the way. Married couples struggle with this all the time. Where do you find that time in the day to have those few moments where, undistracted, you have the opportunity to make contact with each other, to share what's going on, to share what you want to do and where you want to lead your family? It's so hard to find those moments. It's so difficult to find them. But it is in those moments, in those desert moments as a couple, that you will be able to hear God speaking to you on how your family is to be led. In the introduction, it said that the Philippians were a very special community to St. Paul. And St. Paul, as he does in all of his letters, he begins by thanking profusely the people. And he compliments them on the fact that from the very beginning, they have shared in the gospel of the Lord. What is Jesus telling them? That they've been studious, that they've studied the scriptures, that they've read the scriptures, that they know the gospel intellectually? No. That they share in the gospel. They share in the life of Jesus, in his suffering, in his death, in his resurrection. And you and I are called not just to know the gospel, not just to love the gospel, not just to meditate on the gospel. You and I are called to share in the gospel, to share in the full life of Jesus. And how can we even begin to know what that life is if we cannot hear his voice? If we do not take those opportunities to listen. And so, my friends, at the end of this little sharing, I'm going to sit down and I'm just going to wait a little extra longer before we move into our profession of faith. I want to give you a little desert time. Just a little desert time. You may thank me because this is probably the only relaxation you're going to have from now until Christmas. But then I ask that, and it'll only be a short time, but then I ask that you find the way to have that desert experience. Maybe in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament. Maybe in the quiet of your room. You might have to take a walk around the block to find the desert time so that you will hear the Lord remind you of how much he loves you. Remind you that he sent his only son Jesus on this earth because of his love for us. To hear God give us the way and how to follow Jesus and to share in his gospel and to share in his life and suffering so we can share in his resurrection. And as we receive this Eucharist today, we present to the Lord all of the hectic times of our lives. We ask the Lord Jesus to give us that moment of quiet and of desert so that we can hear the voice of God guide us as we share his gospel. God love you.